Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's lesson focuses on a fantastic young poet called Amanda Gorman. If anyone saw Biden's inauguration on Wednesday, then you probably would have seen Gorman perform. On Wednesday we witnessed a momentous occasion as Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th President of the United States. Along with him, Kamala Harris became the first female, Black and Asian American Vice President. But that wasn't the only history that was made. Amanda Gorman stepped on stage outside of the Capitol to perform her original poem, The Hill We Climb, becoming the youngest inaugural poet in history. Amanda's poem was very well received and she went viral just minutes after starting her reading. The poem is laced with metaphors, symbolism, and historical references, inspiring occasional poetry forever in her ambition to unite democracy and hope, truth, liberty, and justice across America. And as Gorman says, this is what we owe our predecessors, each other, and generations to follow. So let's get started with our do now then. So the first question I'd like you to answer is, who is Amanda Gorman and what has she been asked to do? Second question, if you were to write a poem by Biden's inaugural committee, what are some things you might want to communicate and why? And the third question, why do presidents invite poets to speak at inauguration? You've then got an extension task, which is to define occasional poetry. So these are our learning objectives. First one, understand the message and purpose of poet Amanda Gorman during her performance to the American nation at the presidential inauguration. The second one, observe the message, meaning, tone or impact of The Hill We Climb. And the third, to create connections between the moment in history and the poet's messages. So before we watch Amanda's performance together, I just want you to keep these 4 questions in mind and then come back to them afterwards. So throughout the poem we find references to events from the news. I want you to identify these lines. What do these references invite readers to reflect on about America and Americans? Read the poem once more, selecting a line or phrase that struck you as luminous or profound. What about the line caused you to think? Then highlight language techniques, and Miss Gorman has an extraordinary ear for subtle rhymes. Watch or reread aloud The Hill We Climb and listen for them. Which stood out for you? I am going to add the transcripts of both poems we're looking at today onto Teams. Okay, so for those who missed it yesterday, this is the poem.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, in the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert. How could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from our bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Okay, thanks for listening to that, guys. Yeah, really, really inspiring young poet there. I absolutely loved her, and have definitely followed all of her social media platforms. Okay, so moving on, we are now going to compare her poem, The Hill We Climb, to another one of her poems called The Miracle of Morning. Okay, so we're going to come to that in a minute. But again, these three questions I want you to think about before we then watch her perform it. So read the poem once more, selecting a line or phrase that struck you as luminous or profound, and write about what the line caused you to think. Highlight language techniques and highlight structural techniques in a different colour. Okay, so let's watch her perform this now, and then we'll compare.
Hi, I'm Amanda Gorman, and this is my poem, The Miracle of Morning. I thought I'd awaken to a world in mourning, heavy clouds clouding, a society storming, but there's something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. I see a dad with a stroller taking a jog across the street. A bright-eyed girl chases her dog. A grandma on a porch fingers her rosaries. She grins as her young neighbor brings her groceries while we might feel small, separate, and all alone. Our people have never been more closely tethered because the question isn't if we can weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So, on this meaningful morn, we mourn and remend like lights we can't be broken. Even when we bend as one, we will defeat both despair and disease. We stand with healthcare heroes and all employees, with families, libraries, waiters, schools, artists, businesses, restaurants, and hospitals hit hardest. We ignite, not in the light, but in lack thereof. For it is in loss that we truly learn to love. In this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity, for it's our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope if we ever shall lose it. So ensure that this ache wasn't endured in vain. Do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose, use it, read children's books, dance alone to DJ music. Know that this distance will make our hearts grow fonder. From a wave of woes, our world will emerge stronger. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that make us humans kind. Let each dawn find us courageous, brought closer, heeding the lights before the fight is over. When this ends, we'll smile sweetly, finally seeing, in testing times, we became the best of beings.
Okay, so there's some definite similarities between that poem and The Hill That We Climb. But there are also some differences as well. So I want you to try and identify those similarities and differences now in this task. So we're going to do this Venn diagram task where similarities will go in the middle and differences will go on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the diagram. So an exam question that we can think about today is that both poems discuss humankind, absence and hope. Compare the ways that Gorman presents her feelings towards these themes in The Hill We Climb and The Miracle of Morning. So this is some exam practice for our 8-mark answer. So I'd like to see you kind of write half a page or 2 paragraphs for that question later on. Okay, so this is our main apply task today. You have 3 options. You just have to choose one of these to do, unless you want to stretch yourself and do more. The first is to write a poem of your own detailing your experience of listening and reading Gorman's poetry. The second is to write a half a page for analytical writing answering the 8-mark question on the previous slide. That's going to help with your exam practice. And then number 3 is to create a presentation, poster or podcast exploring other poems Gorman has written and comparing these to poems we have already studied this half term. So we've looked at the themes of hope, absence and humankind. Just there. So this is something that has already come up in many of the poems that we've looked at this half term. So this is actually quite a good activity to do because it's going to help with your exam practice. I'd also like to see some historical, political, social, cultural context discussed in your work today, because I think this is going to just get you thinking about the world at the moment, even though it hasn't got anything to do with our exam, because we don't get marks for AO3. But like I always say, the more you understand about the world that the poet writes in and the poet themselves, the more likely you're going to understand the poems that they're writing about, and therefore you are going to be able to write better AO1 and AO2 as a result of knowing that AO3 despite not having marks in it. So remember to conduct your own research using reliable and accurate sources from the internet. That's absolutely fine for you to do. This is a very new poet. I don't expect you to know anything about her. So yeah, just do your own research, and hopefully she'll inspire you as she did me. Finally, we have a review task. So again, write down something you will take away from this lesson, write down a question you still have, and the task that you are most proud of today and why. Thank you for listening, everyone, and if you have any questions, just let me know.